Chapter 7. The Grand Convocation Chamber of the New Republic Senate had been completed only 3 months earlier. Its construction stepped up out of necessity after Queller's bombs had weakened the structure of the old Senate Hall beyond repair. And while there were still bits of trim and scroll work left to be finished, the overall effect was every bit as impressive as its designers had promised. The old arrangement, with the delegate seats arranged in concentric semicircles descending inward towards a raised dais, had been replaced by a series of variably sized, variably shaped blocks of seats connected to each other by short stairways or ramps that had been arranged apparently at random, yet which maintained a consistent grace and style. Separating the seat groups were clear glass panels, or carved lattices, or merely short railings in a meter or two of vertical height, as the designer's fancy had taken them. Each block of seats had an unobstructed view of the central dais, as well as a display that could be adjusted to show either a closer view of the dais or any of the other blocks of seats in the chamber. In many ways, the place reminded Leia of the magnificent Corleone Marlais Theatre back on Alderaan, a renowned palace of the arts that had always been synonymous in her mind with courtesy, culture, and civilization. It had been her secret hope that the Grand Chamber's similar design would help encourage those same qualities in the senators who assembled there. But for today at least, that was clearly not going to be the case. Let me be certain I understand you, President Gaversom, a rough Upqua's voice called over the chamber's sound system. You're telling us that the Bothans were the key to the destruction of Kamas and the near genocide committed against the Kamasi people. Yet at the same time, you tell us you will not seek justice for this heinous act? That is not at all what I have told you, Senator, President Ponk Gaversom said mildly, twitching his tail once and resettling it against his hind legs. Allow me to repeat. A small group, a small group of as yet unidentified Bothans were involved in that tragedy. If and when we are able to learn their names, we will certainly dispense in full measure the justice I know we all seek. Until then, though, it simply cannot be done. Why not? An alien with shaggy blue-green hair and a long, thin face demanded. A Forshal, Leia tentatively identified her, representing the 87 inhabited worlds of Yimnis sector in the Outer Rim. Councillor Phalia does not deny Bothans were involved. Very well, then. Let them be duly punished for this monstrous blot on galactic civilization. Leia glanced across the dais at Borsk Phalia, seated at the far end of the curved row of high councillors. The Bothan's expression and fur were under rigid control, but her Jedi senses had no trouble picking up the turmoil of anxiety behind his face. He had, she knew, a long conversation with the heads of the combined clans back on Bothawui just prior to this meeting. From the hardness of his expression, she guessed the conversation hadn't gone well. I understand your feelings, Senator, Gaversom said. However, I must point out that the legal guidelines of the New Republic are not the same as the traditional codes of Forschulery justice. He unfolded his wings from across his long back and brought them in front of him. The prehensile feather tips touched one of the keys on the lectern, and a section of New Republic criminal law appeared on the display above his head. Those guidelines do not allow us to penalize the entire Bothan people for the crimes of a few. And why do we not know the identities of those supposed few? The Ashori senator called out. I see Councillor Phalia seated to your right. What has he to say about all of this? Gaversom turned his head to look over his withers at Phalia. Councillor Phalia, do you wish to respond? Visibly bracing himself, the Bothan rose to his feet. I understand the anger this revelation has elicited from many of you, he said. I assure you that we of the Bothan clan leadership feel the same anger, and the same desire that the perpetrators of this terrible crime be brought to justice. And rest assured that if we knew exactly who those perpetrators were, we would long ago have dealt with them. The problem is that we do not. There was a short, warbling scream. Reflexively, Leia jumped, belatedly identified the blood-chilling sound as the Iaru equivalent of a skeptical snort. Do you expect us to believe? President Gavrasom, I would ask you to once again remind the senator from Model sector to shut up that noise, another senator interrupted angrily. The harmonics have already caused me to lose 2 eggs this session, and I cannot bear my yearly hatchlings on schedule. I will lose both my status and any possibility of reappointment by my sector assembly. Speaking for myself, that would be a relief, someone else put in before Gavrasom could respond. Some of us are exceptionally tired of your precious eggs being used as an excuse for everything you don't like. Gaversom's wingtips touched a key, and the voice was cut off as the sound system shut down. For another minute, angry voices continued to be heard, echoing indistinctly from various quarters of the chamber, before finally falling reluctantly silent as the participants realized that none of their verbal jabs were getting through to the designated recipients. Gaversom waited for another few seconds before turning the sound system back on. The prologue to the New Republic Charter, he said quietly, exhorts all member worlds to behave towards one another in an acceptable and civilized manner. Shall the members of this Senate be held to a lesser standard? You speak of civilization, President Gaversom, a tall bagman said darkly. How can we of the New Republic Senate consider ourselves civilized if we do not show our repugnance for the horrible crime committed against the Kamasi? Leia cleared her throat. May I remind the Senate, she said, that whatever part any group of Bothans might have played, there is no indication any of them participated in the actual destruction of Camus. That, it seems to me, should be the focal point of our outrage and justice. Do you seek then to excuse the Bothans? A senator she didn't recognize demanded. Besides which, the actual perpetrators were undoubtedly agents of then Senator Palpatine, someone else added from the opposite side of the chamber. All such agents have surely been destroyed during our onerously long war against the Empire. Are you certain of that? Another voice chimed in. We are still learning the full depth of Emperor Palpatine's deceptions against the peoples of the galaxy. Who is to say his agents don't yet walk among us? Are you accusing one of us? If you claim the title, what is that to me? The other shot back. There are still rumors of Imperial agents scattered among us. Again, Gaversom touched the cutoff switch, and again the debate was reduced to distant voices shouting uselessly at each other. Leia listened to the budding argument fade away for the umpteenth time, thanking the Force that she was at least temporarily no longer the one in charge of this madhouse. The voices faded away into a tense silence. Gaversom touched the key again. I'm sure the senator from Chorlian sector was speaking only figuratively, he said with his usual unflappable poise. At any rate, this debate has already passed the point of usefulness and will therefore be suspended for now. If the document which Councillor Organa Solo brought back can be reconstructed to the point where names can be discovered, we will reopen the discussion. Until then, there are many other matters which require our attention. He glanced at his display, then looked up to his right. We will begin with the report of the Economics Committee. Senator Quedlifu? The Economics Committee report was longer than usual, with 2 bills being submitted to the full Senate for consideration. That in itself was fairly unusual, with each senator limited to introducing 1 bill per year and a straight up-and-down vote required to get that bill out of committee. Most of the proposed legislation never found the support necessary to make it to the full Senate. Only a small fraction of those few, moreover, ever survived the Senate scrutiny to actually become law, which was precisely how the system was supposed to work. With nearly 1,000 senators already, and with each one representing 50 to 200 entire worlds, there was no possible way Coruscant could truly look after the interests of all the beings making up the New Republic. This latest modification of the Senate had reduced its role to little more than providing for the common defense and mediating disputes between member sectors. The more commonplace day-to-day governing was handled at the sector, system, planetary, regional, district, and local levels. A few of the senators, remembering the glory days of the Old Republic, occasionally grumbled about the Senate being reduced to what they saw as little more than an elaborate debating society. For the majority, though, the more vivid memory was that of Coruscant's domination during the dark days of the Empire. A relatively weak central government was exactly what they wanted. As it turned out, The Economics Committee was the only one with any bills to introduce, or for that matter, anything really new to report. Gaversom cycled through the rest of the committees with practiced ease and dispatch, bringing the meeting to a close less than 2 hours after it had begun. And yet, even as Leia joined the flow of beings exiting from the chamber, she suspected that none of the senators or high counselors would be occupied with business as usual this afternoon. Kamas would be the thought on everyone's mind. Kamas and justice. Or perhaps vengeance. Your Highness, a tentative voice called through the rumble of conversation. Leia paused and lifted a hand. Over here, 3PO. Ah, the droid said, making his tentative way across the traffic flow towards her. I trust the assembly went well. As well as can be expected under the circumstances, Leia told him. Any messages from the techs about the data card? I'm afraid not, 3PO said, sounding regretful. But I do have a message from Captain Solo. He has returned and will be waiting for you. Leia felt her heartbeat pick up. Did he say anything about his mission to Iphigenia? I'm afraid not, 3PO apologized again. Should I have asked him? No, that's all right, Leia assured him. He did not seem inclined to be overly conversational, the droid mused. He may not have answered even if I had asked. Leia smiled. Probably not, she agreed, 100 fond memories of her husband flashing through her mind. She'd been planning to head straight to her office to sift through some of the mountain of data work waiting on her desk. Now, suddenly, she decided that could wait. Han would be waiting for her in their quarters. Counselor Organa Solo, a voice said from her side. Leia turned, a sinking feeling settling into her. The voice and mental profile. And she was right. It was indeed Gik Dixano, the Ashori senator. Yes, Senator Dixano? I would speak with you, High Counselor, the other said firmly. In your office. Now. Certainly, Leia said, her feelings sinking a little further. The alien's emotions indicated disquietude, but that was all she could read from it. Come with me. Together they made their way across the flow of beings, 3PO struggling to keep up, and into the curved side corridor where the members of the High Council had their offices. Leia caught a glimpse of Thalia as he disappeared into his office. Then they rounded the curve. Leia stopped short, a soft gasp escaping her lips before she could stop it. Preoccupied with her thoughts, and with Dixano's somewhat overpowering presence beside her, she hadn't extended her senses ahead down the corridor. 3 people were standing outside her office door. One of Dixano's aides, and 2 slender beings completely shrouded in hooded cloaks. They wish to speak with you, Dixano said gruffly. Will you speak with them? Leia swallowed, her memories flashing back to her childhood on Alderaan, and the time her adoptive father, Bail Organa, had permitted her to go with him on a private trip to the South Islands. Yes, she told Dixano quietly. I will be honored to speak with your Kamasi friends. The way Senate meetings usually went, Han had expected to be stuck hanging around Leia's office for at least another hour before she returned. It was therefore to his mild surprise that he'd barely gotten comfortable in his wife's inner office when a flicker of displaced air pressure announced that the door from the outer office had just opened. He swiveled his feet off the corner of her desk and landed them quietly on the floor, getting up just as quietly from her chair and patting his way to the door that separated the sections of the office. In the old days, he would have tried to surprise her by jumping out and giving her a big hug and a kiss, but her increasing Jedi skills had long since made trying to sneak up on her a pretty futile exercise. Besides which, embarrassing her with some silly school kid prank would make her madder at him than she probably already was over the Iphigenia thing, especially if she'd brought company with her. She had. With his ear pressed against the door, he could hear at least 2 other voices besides Leia's. For a moment he stood there, waiting to see if she would either bring her visitors in or else invite him out to greet them. She certainly knew by now that he was in here, unless she'd rather he'd keep out of sight completely. And then, across the room at her desk, the intercom display abruptly came on. Understand that we have no desire to make trouble for anyone, someone was saying. We do not wish vengeance, and it is far too late for justice. Frowning, Han crossed back to the desk. So, okay. Leia wanted them to listen in on the conversation, but didn't want him out there, or didn't want whoever it was knowing they were being listened to. And then he got his first close look at the display, and suddenly he understood her reticence. There were two Ashori out there, and two Kamasi. It is not a question of vengeance, one of the Ashori insisted. Probably a full senator, Han decided, if the elaborate tangle of his shoulder clasp was any indication. And it is never too late for justice. Yet what purpose would this so-named justice serve? One of the Kamasi countered quietly. Our world is destroyed, and we are few and scattered. Would punishing the Bothans miraculously make all right again? Perhaps it would, the Ashuri said, his voice starting to rise. Thinking hard and fast, with that trademark Ashuri anger coming along with it. Han grimaced, the memory of his botched negotiation attempts at Iphigenia nagging painfully at him. If the Bothans were declared guilty and forced to make reparations. At the other side of the board, the comm pinged. Leia's private comm channel, Han noted with annoyance. Just when the conversation out there was starting to get interesting. But it was probably one of the kids, and he really ought to answer it. Flicking the intercom channel to record the rest of the conversation going on out there, which was probably illegal, but he didn't care, he muted the speaker volume and hit the comm key. It wasn't the kids, or Winter, or even one of the Nogri. Hello, Solo, Talon Card said. I didn't expect to find you on this channel. Likewise, Han said, frowning at the smuggler. How did you get this frequency? Your wife gave it to me, of course, Card said, managing to look roguish and innocent at the same time. I gave her a ride back here from Wayland in the wild card. I thought you knew that. Yeah, I got a quick message from her about that, Han said. I didn't know you'd conned her out of her private frequency, though. Card smiled, then sobered. We're all suddenly sitting on some highly explosive matters, my friend, he said. Leia and I decided it might be useful for me to be able to contact her, shall we say, discreetly. Has she told you yet about the Kamas data card we brought back from Wayland? Han's eyes flicked to the intercom display and the two Kamasi. No, I haven't had a chance to talk to her since I got back, he said. But as it happens, she's got a pair of Kamasi in the outer office right now, along with a couple of Ashori. Card hissed softly between his teeth. So the Ashori are getting involved, which means the Diamala will undoubtedly be coming in on the other side. Oh, undoubtedly, Han agreed. The other side of what? I don't suppose it's much of a secret anymore, Card said. At least not on the exalted levels you circle in these days. I'm sure Leia will fill you in later, but the bottom line is that we've discovered it was a group of so far unidentified Bothans who sabotaged Kamas's shields on the night of its destruction. Han felt his stomach tighten. Great, he growled. Just great. There aren't enough people out there who hate the Bothans already. This is just what we need. I agree, Card said. I hope the Senate is up to the task of keeping this under some semblance of control. The main reason I called was to tell Leia that our friend Mazik has caught Lack Jit, the Deveronian who actually found the data card. We've got him locked away, and I'll keep him there as long as she wants me to. Unfortunately, it appears he's already spread the news as far as his little feet and the flow of credits would take it. I don't think there's any chance of keeping this a private matter within the New Republic hierarchy. Yeah, well, things were going along too smooth anyway, Han said sourly. Thanks. Any time, Card said blandly. You know I'm always at your service. That's good, Han said, because I got another problem I'd like you to tackle. Certainly. Cash your account. We had a little run-in with some pirates off Iphigenia, Han said, ignoring the question. Good-sized crowd. They had a Kaloth battlecruiser, a couple of Corellian gunships, and some Corsair starfighters. Well-equipped group, Card agreed. On the other hand, you'd be a fool to hit a place like Iphigenia without enough firepower to handle the job. It still surprised me a little, Han said. But here's the kicker. Luke says the battlecruiser had clones aboard. Card's expression didn't change, but the lines at the corners of his eyes tightened noticeably. Does he now? He said. Any idea what kind of clones? He didn't say, Han said. You ever hear of a pirate gang running with clone crewers? Not that I can recall, Card said, stroking his beard thoughtfully. My guess would be that they're leftovers from that big Imperial offensive 10 years ago. Grand Admiral Thrawn had Mount Tantus long enough to have turned out quite a lot of them. So what are they doing with a pirate gang? Han persisted. Don't you think that what's left of the Empire would want to keep them for themselves? Point, Card conceded. On the other hand, maybe they've decided it's more effective to hire them out to one or more gangs as advisors or elite warriors, perhaps in exchange for a hand in choosing their targets or else a share of the plunder. Could be, Han said. It could also be that some pirate groups found its own supply of cloning cylinders. Card's lip twitched. Yes, he agreed grimly. That could conceivably be the case. So what are we going to do about it? I suppose I'd better look into it, Card said. See what I can find out. He lifted an eyebrow slightly. Cash or account? Han rolled his eyes. Every time he thought Card might actually be on the edge of doing something noble and self-sacrificing, the other always found a way to remind Han that his relationship with the New Republic was strictly professional. I give up, he said. What's it going to take to bring you over to our side, anyway? Oh, I don't know, Card said consideringly. What did it take to lure you away from the carefree life of an independent trader? Han made a face. Leia, he said. Exactly, Card said, dryly. Now, if she had a sister, I don't suppose she does. Not that I know of, Han said. Though with the Skywalker family, you never know. I won't hold my breath, Card said. We'll do this on account, then. We can set the price later. You're all heart. I know, Card said. Who shall I report to? You or Luke? Better make it me, Han said. Luke may be out of touch. He's gone off on a little pirate hunt of his own. Really? Card said, frowning. Who's he going after, if I may ask? The Kavrilhu gang. He got the location of one of their bolt holes from the New Republic intelligence. It's an asteroid cluster in the Charon system, and he decided to sneak in and take a look around. I see, Card said. Too late to call him back, I suppose. Probably, Han said. Don't worry. Luke can take care of himself. That wasn't the part I was worried about, Card said. I was thinking more along the lines that his sudden appearance might chase them underground where we can't get at them at all. Well, if they scare that easily, they can't be much of a threat, can they? Han suggested. I suppose that's one way of looking at it. Card paused, and a shadow seemed to pass over his face. Speaking of Luke, how's he doing these days? Han studied the smuggler, trying to decipher his suddenly changed expression. All right, I guess, he said cautiously. Why? A feeling, Card said. Mira's been oddly restive lately, and seemed a bit touchy for a while after we ran into Leia on Wayland. I thought it might have something to do with him. Funny you should bring that up, Han said, scratching his chin thoughtfully. I got that same feeling about Luke the last time I mentioned Mira to him. Coincidence? Perhaps, Card said. On the other hand, they're both rather strong in the Force. Maybe there's something going on there that they're both sensing. Could be, Han said slowly, though that wouldn't explain the other stuff Luke seemed to have been going through at Iphigenia. Would it? These clones, maybe? Card shrugged. I'll try to talk to her about it. Maybe find a way to get the two of them together. Yeah, it's been a while since they've talked, Han agreed. I'll try to work on Luke at this end when he gets back. Good, Card said. In the meantime, I'd better get on this pirate matter. Tell Leia goodbye for me, if you would, and tell her I'll be in touch. Sure, Han said. Happy hunting. Card smiled, and the display went blank. Han leaned back in his chair, gazing darkly at nothing in particular. Kamas. It was, as he'd said to Card, all that the New Republic needed right now. Because it wasn't just Camas, though Camas by itself was certainly bad enough. The bigger problem was that dragging Camas back into the light again was going to dredge up memories of 1,000 other atrocities that had been inflicted by one group or another over the years. Old grudges, old feuds, old conflicts. The galaxy was riddled with them. It was what had made it possible for people like Card, and him and Chewie for that matter, to make a good living at smuggling. There were so many sides of so many conflicts for smugglers to sell stuff to. For the last couple of decades, the need for a common resistance to the Empire had kept most of those resentments buried under the surface, but not anymore. The Imperial threat was so small now as to be laughable. If this Camas thing got all those old problems boiling to the surface again. He started as the door to his left hissed open. "Hi," Leia said softly as she came into the room. "Oh, hi," Han said, scrambling to his feet and throwing a belated look at the intercom display. Engrossed first with Card and then with his own thoughts, he hadn't even noticed Leia's guests departing. "Sorry, I got distracted." "That's all right," Leia said, stepping into his arms for a quick hug. Or not so quick. She remained there, pressing close to him, holding him tightly. "I just talked to Card," Han said, her hair tickling his lips. "He told me what you found out about Camas." "We're in trouble, Han," Leia said, her voice muffled by his shirt. "They don't realize it yet, most of them, but this could be the biggest threat the New Republic has ever faced. It could literally tear us apart." "It'll be okay," Han soothed her, feeling just a tiny bit smug despite the seriousness of the moment. Most of the senators in there hadn't spotted the danger of the Camas thing, but he had. "We got through that Almania rebellion okay, didn't we?" "It isn't the same," Leia said. "Queller was a troubled man lashing out around him, and the New Republic was trying to stop him without looking to everyone like we were becoming a new version of the Empire. What Camas is going to do is polarize good, honest people, all of whom genuinely want justice but differ violently as to what that justice should consist of." "It'll still be okay," Han insisted, taking her by her upper arms and pushing her far enough away to peer sternly into her eyes. "Let's not give up before we even get started, okay?" He stopped, a sudden horrible suspicion digging into him. "Unless," he added slowly, "it's already over. Do you know something I don't?" "I don't know," Leia said, her eyes slipping away from his gaze. "I'm sensing something about the coming days. Uh, I don't know, a crisis point, I suppose, where something vitally important could go either of two ways." "About Camas?" Han asked. "I don't know," Leia sighed. "I've tried meditating, but so far I haven't been able to get anything more. All I know is that it started when I met Card on Wayland and we read the Camas data card." Han said, wishing now that he'd tried to talk Luke out of his private pirate hunt. He might have been able to help Leia focus this feeling of hers. "Well, don't worry about it. You'll get it. A little quiet time, a little husbandly affection, and it'll pop right out at you." Leia smiled at him, some of the tension leaving her face as she did so. "Is that what you want right now? A little wifely affection?" "First thing I want to do is get you out of here," Han told her, taking her arm and starting her towards the door. "You need some peace and quiet, and once the kids get back from their classes, there will be precious little of either. Let's grab it while we can." "Sounds good to me," Leia sighed. "I don't imagine they're doing anything out there right now except arguing about justice and revenge. They can do that without my help." "Sure," Han said. "Nothing important's going to happen in the galaxy for the next hour." "You sure?" He squeezed her arm reassuringly. "I absolutely guarantee it." There was a flicker from the bridge lights, and though the viewports, the mottled sky of hyperspace faded away, but not into the usual pattern of star lines. This time, when the mottled sky vanished, it vanished into total blackness. And into total blindness. For a long moment, Captain Noggle gazed out the Tyrannic's viewport at the emptiness, fighting against the queasy feeling of vulnerability. True, jumping his Imperial Star Destroyer while cloaked had brought them into the Bothawui system completely blind and deaf, which was a potentially disastrous position for a combat ship to be in. But in this case, of course, the cloaking shield also worked the other way, concealing them from their enemies. Still, all other things being equal, it wasn't a trade-off he would have voluntarily chosen to make. "Report from the hangar bay," the fighter control officer called. "Scout ships are away." "Acknowledged," Nalgol said, scanning as much of the blackness out there as he could see without moving his head. It wouldn't look good for the bridge crew to see him looking back and forth at nothing. He caught a glimpse of one of the drive flares coming out from beneath the hull, and then the scout crossed the cloaking shield boundary and vanished. He took a deep breath, wondering yet again what in the Empire he and the others were doing here. Sitting there in Moff Dizra's office with Trazyn and Argona and Dorja, it had all sounded reasonable enough. Out here in the wilds of the Bothawui system, millions of kilometers from anywhere, it didn't seem nearly as clever anymore. On the other hand, how many of Grand Admiral Thrawn's schemes had ever looked even vaguely reasonable until they were sprung on the enemy? Nalgol snorted under his breath. He'd never served directly beneath Thrawn, or any of the Emperor's other Grand Admirals for that matter, so he'd never been able to form a personal opinion of their skills. Still, even viewed from the edges of Thrawn's war machine, where the Tyrannic's duty had taken it most of that time, Nalgol had to admit that the Empire had been doing pretty well while the Grand Admiral was in command, before he'd been murdered by that Nogri traitor Rook, or had apparently been murdered. That had been a nifty little sleight of hand. How had he pulled it off, anyway? More to the point, why had he been lying low all these years, letting incompetent megalomaniacal fools like Admiral Dalla bleed the Empire of resources without gaining anything to show for it? And why, now that he was back, had he linked up with Moff Disra of all people? Nalgol grimaced to himself. He'd never liked Disra, had never really trusted the man, for one thing. He'd always struck Nalgol as the type who would fight viciously to keep his share of the scraps of the Empire, rather than watch it grow to someone else's advantage. If Thrawn had thrown in with him, maybe he wasn't as smart as legend had it. Of course, Dorja had vouched firmly for the Grand Admiral, both for his character and his military genius. But then, Argona just as firmly vouched for the competence of Disra himself. So what did any of them know? But at least it was Thrawn back there. The genetic analysis he'd done had confirmed that beyond the whisper of a doubt. It was Thrawn, and everyone said he was a genius. He would just have to hope they were right. A movement to the left caught his attention, and he turned to see one of the scout ships cut across the edge of the cloaking shield, changing course to stay inside it. "Well?" Nalgol demanded. "We're nearly on top of it, sir," the comm officer reported. "A small course change and we'll be there." "Feed the course to the helm," Nalgol ordered, though if that hadn't already been done, he was going to be angry. "Helm, get us moving. Comm, what about the Obliterator and Iron Hand?" "Our scouts have made contact with theirs, sir," the fighter control officer said. "They're coordinating our courses to make sure we don't bump into each other." "They had better," Nalgol warned icily. Skulking around out here, blind and deaf, was bad enough. It would be the height of professional humiliation if the three Star Destroyers managed to fumble their sightless way into collisions with each other. All the more so if the cloaking shields went down and the spectacle was laid bare right out in the open for all of Bothawui system to see. But at the moment, of course, they couldn't see. That was the whole point of this exercise. As far as the Bothan homeworld defense apparatus was concerned, there was nothing out here except the exhausts of a handful of small ships moving apparently aimlessly around. Small ships, and one not quite so small comet. "We're underway, Captain," the helm announced. "ETA, 5 minutes." Nalgol nodded. Acknowledged. Slowly, the minutes ticked by. Nalgol watched the blackness outside the viewport, occasionally glimpsing a drive flare as one or another of his scouts ducked back inside the shroud of the cloaking shield to check on the Tyrannic's progress, and then ducked back out again. The timer ran down to 0. He sensed the huge ship slowing. And then, abruptly, there it was, off to starboard, a slice of dirty rock and ice poking through the edge of the shield, sliding rapidly sternward. There, he snapped. We're passing it. We're on it, sir, the helm called back. Sure enough, even as Nalgo watched, the aft motion of the Comet's edge came to a stop and then slowly backed up until it was hanging off the starboard side, just ahead of the command superstructure. We're stabilized now, Captain. Tether lines? The shuttles are on their way with them now, sir, another officer reported. They'll be secured in 10 minutes. Good. The tether lines weren't nearly strong enough to physically hold the Star Destroyer and Comet together, of course. Their purpose was merely to give the helm the necessary feedback to make sure the orbiting bodies stayed in the same relative positions as the Comet continued its leisurely drift inward towards Bathwooi. Any word from the other two Star Destroyers? The Iron Hand is successfully tethered, the comm officer reported. The Obliterator's in position. They should be tethered about the same we are. Naugel nodded, taking a deep breath and letting it out quietly. So they'd made it. They were here, presumably unobserved by the Bothans. And now there was nothing to do but wait, and hope that Grand Admiral Thrawn was really the genius everyone claimed he was. And that's the end of the chapter. Hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you soon.